Welcome to Elite Fantasy Basketball's first podcast of the season. My name's Adam Stock. I'm the guy behind Elite Fantasy Basketball. Thanks for bearing with me the last couple of weeks. I moved provinces during week one of the season, so I've just been getting set up in my new place. It's all systems go now, so expect some weekly pods going forward. If you've listened before, you know how these pods work. I pick a busy day of the week and go game by game to touch on as many players as possible. I'll be talking about shallow leagues, deep leagues, and mixing in some points and roto league talk when it's appropriate. You'll be getting plenty of pickup and drop suggestions, and I'll be letting you know which players are sell highs and buy lows. I'm going to be focusing mostly on borderline players and players that are over or underachieving. Telling you how great Steph Curry is doesn't provide a lot of value. It just wastes your time. We had 13 games last night, so I'm not going to have too much of an intro. Let's just get right into it. I'm aiming to touch on 100 plus players in this baby so we can kick off the year on the right foot. We'll start with the Celtics versus the Raptors. The Celtics took down the Raps despite another rough shooting game from Tatum. He had 22 points on 24 shots. The rest of his line was excellent, however, which has kind of been the pattern this year when it comes to first-round picks. I'm worried about Embiid, Lillard, and Luka, and to a lesser extent Beal, but not Tatum. He just can't shoot at the moment from the field or from the line. He's coming in way low in both areas. I see no reason why that won't correct itself eventually. And once it does, the line should start to get real tasty real fast. His usage rate is actually up a couple of percentage points this year. So if he does remember how to shoot, he could actually top last year's numbers. He's a very strong buy low target. I'd probably be floating my second round pick for Tatum. I'd feel pretty comfortable with that in most scenarios. Marcus Smart has also started the year cold, but he did put together a very nice game last night. He had 6 dimes, 3 steals, and 13 points. If you're punting field goal percentage, you should be sending out those buy low offers. Smart is a tough fit outside of that build, but in punt field goal percentage, there's no real downside and there's top 50 upside. If he starts shooting in his usual high 30s, which is not a stretch, he'll end up in that range. He's ranked well outside of the top 100 at the moment, so you should be able to get him pretty cheap. Time Lord went off, which isn't a huge surprise. The Raps really had no answer for him. It's not a huge surprise because the Raptors are sticking with their small ball lineup, and that small ball lineup is going to get abused by quality bigs. Like Time Lord, they're going to be a team to stream bigs against if they continue with the lineup. Schroeder had 20 and 4 with a couple threes and an ugly 8 turnovers. Just a borderline guy in 12 team, and he's pretty expendable in 10. Kind of the same deal as last year, really. The nice points and assists hide all of the other issues with his line. He's definitely someone to sell high the next time he gets hot. He always has more trade value than he should, since almost all of his values in the categories fantasy managers love overpaying for. Jay Rich had his best game of the season with 15 points, 2 threes, and 3 steals. It's a very nice line, but we'll ignore that for now in leagues with less than 16 teams. Just hasn't been that good since Miami, and he's only been a top 200 player this year. On the Rap side, Scotty Barnes had a big night. He had 21, 7, and 4, but he didn't have any extras. He's been a borderline top 80 guy this year, but I'm not sure that we've seen his ceiling yet. Not just because he's a rookie and rookies tend to improve, but because his steal rate was great in college and it's been average at best in the pros. If his steal rate wakes up, he could jump another round or two, although his field goal percentage is likely going to come down a little bit. Probably not going to shoot 53% from the floor this year, although he's not taking a ton of jumpers. If you are punting threes, try to trade for him after his next bad stretch. He'll be a beast there. I'm talking potentially top 50. Siakam still looks a little rusty, but it's nothing to worry about. He'll figure it out. I would still bet on him cracking the top 40 this year. He's going to get those sweet Nick Nurse minutes once he's healthy. He'll probably be around 36 a night, and it's pretty much impossible for him not to be at least around top 40 if he's playing that much. Trent had another poor game with no steals. He hasn't been a steals guy historically, and he's not going to continue to average 2.5 steals per game. But I think 1.5 steals per game plus is a reasonable expectation going forward. He's still leading the league in deflections, so the current big number isn't as fluky as you'd think. The top 5 in deflections right now is Trent, Caruso, Melton, Fred, and Smart. That's good company to be in if you're Trent. Precious had 9 boards, 3 dimes, 1 steal, and 3 blocks. It's a nice line, but not one that makes me want to have him on my roster in 12 or 14 team leagues. The defensive stats haven't been there this year, and most nights he's just been a rebound specialist that kills you in the percentages. There's also a good chance that his role shrinks significantly going forward. He got 24 minutes last night, but that was without Kem Birch in the lineup, and Birch has been a lot better than Precious this year. Wouldn't be surprising to see Precious be a 16-team league drop soon as well. Boucher only got 6 minutes. 6 minutes with no Birch tells you all you need to know. He needs to be watched, obviously. His upside is still huge, but it's hard to see a path to even 20 minutes a night. There are no power forward minutes available this year with Scotty coming in and Pascal now healthy, and he'll be stuck behind the Raptors small ball unit, Birch, and possibly Precious. Even in super deep leagues, he's a drop. Rostering Boucher is like playing a man down at this point, and the small chance that he turns into a mid-round player is not worth all the points that you're going to lose due to his current setup. Next up is the Bulls versus the Mavs. The Bulls took down the Mavs, but the big news of the night was not basketball related. Nikola Vucevic has COVID and is out at least 10 days. This is interesting not only because it opens up some minutes for other guys, but because he played 32 minutes last night. There's probably going to be some contact tracing going on, so don't be surprised if some other guys get put into protocol over the next couple of days. We saw what happened with Philly. Tony Bradley and Elise Johnson will pick up some minutes. Both are per-minute studs in the big man cats and are worth watching. Bradley's a safer bet since he's been ahead of Johnson for most of the year, although Johnson did play slightly more last night. We'll likely see more small ball lineups as well, so expect a bump for Caruso, Derek Jones, and Javonte Green. I'm still holding Caruso in standard leagues. He's been a little quiet lately, but those elite steals are still worth it. He had 6 last night, although 22 minutes of playing time is not ideal. The other two guys are just low-end steal streamers. Lonzo, DD, and Levine are obviously going to pick up some usage as well. On the Dallas side, Luka had another messy night, lots of nice counting stats, but 6 for 18 shooting from the field and 7 for 10 shooting from the line. He's a buy low, but you have to be careful not to give up too much. Looks like another year of top 30 numbers at best in 9 cat and second round numbers in 8. If you're not punting one of his weak cats, he's not going to be super elite. Tim Hardaway at 21 with 5 threes is not a high upside guy, but he's played well enough up to this point to be a hold. In 12, in 10, he's a little expendable, although he's viable. He's going to lose value because his steal rate, which has been about average, won't hold. He'll end up as more of a top 130 guy. Historically, he's been a really poor steal guy. KP had a nice game from a per-game standpoint. I'm not worried at all. I'd still bet on second-round numbers and friendly builds. Still not that useful in real-life ball, but he is made for category leagues, and that's what we care about here. Whether or not he's a buy-low option comes down to what your team looks like and your risk appetite. If you have super durable guys, I think he's worth buying low with the mid-round player. Should end up as a third-round player at worst on a per-game basis. If you already have health risks on your team, then I'd stay away. DFS had a quiet night on the offensive end and boards, but he did have 3 steals and a block. He's fine as a 13th man, but until he stops shooting in the mid-30s, it's hard to call him anything more than that. Should eventually be a top 125-ish guy in 9 cat leagues when he starts to shoot decently. So in 16-team leagues, you should hold through the cold stretches. Jalen Brunson played 30 and had 12 points and 7 assists with a steal on his usual strong shooting. He's just a low-end guy, but he should be rostered in 12-team leagues. I love him in punt steals since that build usually struggles to find enough dimes, which Brunson can help with. And since he's going to gain a lot of value there, he always comes with a very poor steal rate. The Wizards took down the Cavs despite Bradley Beal stinking up the joint again. He went 4 for 19 for 13 points. He's another major buy low target. His usage rate is almost identical to last year, yet he's averaging 8 less points. That shows you how poorly he's been shooting. However, he's not going to quite match last year's numbers because he's getting hit pretty hard by the new rules. Beal is averaging only 4 free throws a night this year. Last year, he got to the line 7.7 times a night. It's a huge drop. He's probably going to be more of a top 20-ish per game guy this year. But since he's not a rest risk, I'd value him a little higher than that. The Wizards getting off to a nice start is great news since it basically guarantees that they'll be in the play-in fight late in the year. Harrell at 24 and 11, he was one of my guys in preseason, so I'm obviously a big believer that the hot start is for real. He's going to be getting the majority of the center minutes when it's just him and Gafford, and I'm not too worried about Thomas Bryant at this point. With the Wizards looking pretty decent, it's pretty unlikely that Harrell will be limited in any way for the sake of getting the younger guys more minutes. He's a sell high if you can get a top 40 guy for him. He's posting top 29 category numbers, but since you can't get a top 40 guy for him, I just hold tight, especially if the Wizards having an awesome playoff schedule in most leagues. Gafford played 22 and is quiet. 22-ish minutes should be the expectation going forward, which is fine for category leagues. He can still be a mid-round guy in friendly builds with that much run. In points leagues, however, he's just borderline. I wouldn't call him a must-hold in that setup as the settings are not kind to him. Kuzma had another big game with 22 points, 5 boards, a steal, a block, and 6 threes. He's a must-hold in all leagues. It doesn't sound like Rui is all that close, and given how the Hachimura situation has played out, I don't think it's a lock that Rui goes back to major minutes. Kuz could be the guy at the 4 all year long. KCP had another poor shooting game, but he did pick up 2 more steals. That makes 4 games in a row with at least 2 steals. He's a real nice streamer in 12 and is worth considering in 14 for those steals and his threes. In 16-team leagues, I call him a must-grab. There was nothing too interesting going on with the Cavs. Allen, Garland, and Mobley had solid games, and Okoro did nothing despite playing big minutes. Okoro is going to be playing a ton with Sexton down, but he's not going to be even a 16-team league option. It's pretty borderline even in 20-team leagues. It's only been 5 games, but he's producing some bottom of the barrel tier permanent numbers again, which is what he did last year. He's just not made for categories, and since he doesn't produce standout numbers in any category, he's pretty worthless as a streamer. Rubio went big for 25-5. It's not much to say here either. He's a must grab, and if you already have him, then congrats. Rubio should be a mid-round guy in friendly builds until Sexton is back. Osman played 28 and is worth considering in deeper leagues for his points and threes. He'll be solid in both categories, but he'll do nothing elsewhere, which makes him just a streamer in 12-team leagues. The Nuggets beat the Pacers 101-98. That Jokic suspension worked out real well for the Nuggets. The MVP got a night off, got a nice rest day, and they still got the win. Barton led the way with 36-3 with 6 threes and 2 steals. A bit of a sell high. He's not going to be an early round guy, but I wouldn't be willing to give him up for less than a clear mid-round option. He's been a top 70 guy in 2 of the last 4 seasons. So what he's doing right now isn't as fluky as you think, especially with the MPJ situation up in the air. Gordon did nothing despite Jokic being out. He's just a weak 14-team league option. I see no reason to treat him as more than a streamer in 12. Just doesn't have that much upside in Denver. Monte Morris, same deal. He had 10-4. Like Gordon, he's more of a mediocre 14-team league guy. That might even be a stretch. Probably a better fit for 16-team leagues. The Nuggets just run everything through Jokic, as they should, and it crushes the value of most of his teammates. It's a little like the Luka situation with the Mavs. Luka just crushes the value of his teammates. Bones played 22, which was a career high. He's definitely a watch, as his permanent numbers have been excellent this year, but until we see minutes in the mid-20s consistently, he's not someone to jump on, even in deep leagues like 16-team leagues. No LeVert for the Pacers last night. His absence was not due to it being a back-to-back set. He's out tonight as well. Seems like his back issue flared up, which is very scary news. We should get more information on his situation shortly. Until then, it's hard to say how much we should panic. Despite LeVert sitting, Duarte only played 21 minutes. I'm not too worried about that. The low minutes were due to him really having his first bad game of the year. He's been so solid all year. It's also due to TJ McConnell rolling. Duarte is locked in as a standard league guy with Warren looking pretty far away. Speaking of Warren, he's not a must-hold. It doesn't sound like we're going to see him anytime soon. It's like he's going to be somewhat limited when he's back. It wouldn't be surprising to see him sit during back-to-back sets, and he'll probably have some low-minute nights. If you need that IL or IL plus spot, feel free to drop him. Justin Holiday got the start with LeVert out and did absolutely nothing in 35 minutes. He's having a bit of a rough year. He's just a 3 streamer for now, even in deep leagues. Usually he's a very good steal streamer, but that hasn't been the case this year. He's sitting at only 0.7 steals per game. TJ had a big night with 16-9 on nice shooting, but with no steals. The steals continue to be missing, and until they come back around, it's hard to make the argument that he's more than a streamer, even in 14-team leagues. His role just isn't as big this year when the Pacers are healthy, and his per-minute numbers haven't been as strong as they were last year. Next up is the Warriors versus Wolves. The Warriors took care of business, winning 123-110. For once, it wasn't the Steph Curry show. Steph had a modest 25. It was Wiggins with a bit of a revenge game. Been very quiet this year, but he showed up big time last night, dropping 35. I would try to use this big game to sell high on Wiggins. Before last night, he was posting only top 130 numbers, and his role could shrink a bit once Clay is back. It could be Poole taking the biggest hit. That's very possible. But with Poole playing well up to this point, it could be Wiggins instead. I'd aim for a safe top 100 guy. You do that, you'll probably come away pretty happy with it. I wouldn't wait to send out the sell high offers. It's Wiggins. He could turn into a pumpkin next game. Draymond left early with a thigh contusion. It doesn't sound serious, but it could cost him a game or two. If he's out, you should stream Bielitsa. He'll get extra run and be a nice source of boards, threes, and low-end dimes. Iggy would play more too if Draymond has to miss time, which would make him a very nice streamer for those in need of dimes and defensive numbers. Been surprisingly decent this year. He's sitting at 4.1 assists per game, 0.9 steals per game, and 0.8 blocks per game. If he gets extra minutes, he could also give you maybe 5-6 rebounds. That has some value. Last night he had 8 assists, 2 steals, and 2 blocks. Gary Payton played 15. He was quiet, only 1 steal last night, but he remains an excellent steal streamer. It's not someone to hold long-term in 16-team leagues, though, since the rest of his line is weak, and the minutes won't be there every night. It was Anthony Edwards' night on the Wolves side. He had 48, 5, and 5. The kid is a stud. The efficiency numbers have been so-so this year, but that was to be expected. If you're punting field goal percentage, then he could be a top 30 guy in your setup. Outside of that build, he'll likely settle in as more of a top 50 guy just because of his so-so percentages. Pat Bev had another really nice punt points game. He had 6 boards, 7 dimes, and a block. He's a must-grab as long as he's playing big minutes, and not just in punt points. He played 34 last night, which is more than he needs. He could be super useful even in 26 to 28 Jaden McDaniels only played 14 and is a drop in all leagues. I just did not understand the hype in preseason. I found him fine as the flyer because the Wolves were hyping him up, but I just didn't see a path to the top 100. His per minute numbers were very weak last year outside of blocks, and that's been the case this year as well. It's hard to see him being more than a defensive category streamer at any point this year, and maybe not even a particularly good one. Naz Reid played 25 and dropped 16 and 7 with a steal and a block. That's not super surprising. Naz is always productive. He's always a quality streamer. Wouldn't call him a pickup outside of 16 team leagues at this point, though, due to the low minutes. Could easily play 12 minutes next game. Jared Vanderbilt had 6 boards, 2 steals, and 2 blocks in only 18 minutes. Super intriguing guy since his per minute numbers on the boards and defensive categories are excellent, and he has the potential to be a nice field goal percentage guy. But until we see him get consistent minutes, even in the low 20s, he's just a streamer and standard. In 16-team leagues, however, I'd say he's worth a stash for his upside. Next up is the Pistons versus the Rockets. Somewhat intriguing game despite who was playing. The Pistons and Cade won the showdown of this year's top 2 picks. Cade had the best game of his career with 20 points, 4 boards, 3 assists, 2 steals, 1 block, and 4 threes. I absolutely love him as a buy low target and punt field goal percentage. Outside of turnovers, he's not going to have any weaknesses in that setup. All of his counting stats should be good to great. So I would get those buy low offers out there after his next quiet game, because once he starts rolling, his price is going to go through the roof. Fantasy players do not like to give up their prized rookies for cheap. Jeremy Grant was the one who won the game for the Pistons, however. He had 35 with 4 threes and plenty of extras. He'll lose some touches once Cade really gets going, but I'm not sure his value is going to dip all that much. Cade being healthy is just really good news for the offense in general, and it should help Grant's efficiency. Grant likely won't continue to be a top 70 guy because his 1.2 steals per game average won't hold, but the top 90 is still doable, and it'll be more valuable than that in punt field goal percentage. Given where you likely took him, that's decent value. Beef Stew got in foul trouble early and never got out of it. He only played 15 minutes, but he did have 8 boards, a steal, and a block. I'm holding in all leagues. Yes, it's been a really rough start, but it feels unlikely that his minutes will be limited all year given the direction the Pistons are going in. Most nights his per minute production has been solid, so once he does get in that 27 plus minute per game range, there's a good chance that he'll be a mid-round guy. It looks like Olenek also suffered some kind of knee injury. We don't know the severity yet, but if he does miss time, Casey would have no choice but to unleash Stu. If it's a long-term issue, I would buy low on Stu immediately. Olenek had a great game himself, and he should be held at least until we know more. Casey's yanked his minutes around as well, but I'm hesitant to drop him because his per minute numbers look an awful lot like they did last year. He's been awesome on a per minute basis. If the minutes do come, he'll be a beast. That's not a guarantee, but there's still mid-round upside here. Killian Hayes returned to the lineup. He played 31 minutes and he did nothing. That should surprise absolutely no one. He's not a 16-team league hold, and he's just a low-end assist and steal streamer. Jalen Green held his own against Cade. He had 23 on 20 shots with 3 threes and 5 boards. If you've had a rough start to the year, I would not call him untouchable. I would try to hold him in most situations, but I wouldn't be eating 7-2 loss after 7-2 loss for him. Try to trade him before dropping him, though, if you do want to bail. Someone should probably bite. If you're putting field goal percentage, try to get him on the cheap. There's not much downside to gambling on him in that setup, especially in 8 category leagues. Christian Wood had another big night that was ruined by some poor free throw shooting. He only went 3 for 6 from the line. He's been so bad from the charity stripe that he almost forces you to punt free throw percentage. I know a lot of people are angry about that, and if you're not cool with it, I'm fine with trading him. I would aim for a top 50 or 60 guy for him. However, you may not get that from a non-punt free throw percentage team, but the punt free throw percentage team in your league, there's probably 2 or 3 maybe willing to pay that price. Tate had another solid game with 14 and 8 with some extras. He's not a high upside guy, but he could easily flirt with the top 100 this year. At this point, I say he's clearly above the streaming line in standard leagues. KPJ had another extremely messy line and killed his owners at the free throw line. 8 for 14 is just really rough. If you are not punting percentage plus turnovers, I would try to move him. He's solid in points leagues, but in category leagues, it's hard to see him being more than low end this year. In 9 cat, he's probably not going to be even a top 200 guy outside of friendly builds. In Roto, he's a straight up cut because you're never going to be able to start him this year. I would rather start a random dude off the wire anytime over KPJ and Roto. The Lakers C team and the Heat's B team had a nice OT battle last night. The Lakers pulled out an OT behind a big Russ game and a monster performance from Malik Monk of all people. My advice regarding Russ hasn't changed. Try to sell him after every big game that he has. He's not going to be very useful this year outside of punt, free throw, and turnover setups. That's really the only build where he has a shot at being an early round player. I had him as only a top 80-ish guy coming into the year, and I'm not sure I'd give up a player of that level for him. I just wouldn't want to deal with all the headaches, and LeBron's eventual return will take a big bite out of his counting stats. He's another guy that you absolutely need to stay away from in Roto. Monk had 27 on 13 shots, which is a fluke. He can get hot from time for time, but most nights he's going to play around 20 minutes and give you about 1.5 threes and not much else. Melo was quiet, but we are holding him and also selling him high as soon as we can. The shooting is just not going to last forever, so don't get greedy and wait to sell. If he falls off, his value is going to tank very quickly. If you can get a top 80 guy for him, that's a huge win. Even top 100 would be solid. Avery Bradley also had a big game. He had 17 with 5 threes. That can be ignored as well. It's just a weird night overall for the Lakers. On the Heat side, Jimmy went down early with an ankle injury, and he's already been ruled out of Friday night's game. Given his injury history, I think we have to assume that he's going to miss a handful of games. He's a fantasy monster. I love buckets, but there's not many players in the league who are more injury-prone than him. With Jimmy down, Duncan Robinson minutes spiked. He played 45. Just a streamer when everyone's healthy, but with Jimmy down, I'd be grabbing him. The minutes should be pretty significant, so even if he remains cold from the field, he could still get back into the 3.5 threes per game range, at least temporarily. Bam picked up 6 steals to go along with 28 points and 10 rebounds. RIP to that buy low window. With Jimmy out, I bet Bam's assist rate spikes a little bit. However, he's probably going to end up in the 3.5 assists per game range when everyone is healthy. Lowry has really killed his dimes. Kyle should also get a bump with Jimmy out. He should start scoring in the upper teens, and he's going to give you 9 or 10 dimes a night until his backcourt partner's back. Hero is also going to see his usage spike with Jimmy out, and he'll probably pick up some minutes. Bit of sell high because he won't stay this hot, but his role and his usage have been large enough this year that the top 100 is still very possible, even if he does start to cool down a little bit. Next up is the Hornets versus the Grizzlies. The Hornets got a big win against the Grizzlies despite LaMelo and Bridges having nights off from the field. They can thank Kelly Oubre and his 37 on 13 for 17 shooting for that. Oubre had 7 threes, 5 boards, and 2 steals as well. I'd add Oubre to see if the big game leads to extra minutes, but I'm not that hopeful at the moment. Even though PJ Washington has been out for a little bit, Oubre has played less than 18 minutes in 3 of his last 5 games. In deep leagues, he's a long-term hold as the low-minute games hurt less. Plumdog had 6, 4, and 5 with a steal and 2 blocks. That's a nice line, but with how he's been shooting from the charity stripe, I wouldn't call him a must-roster outside of punt free throw percentage. Rozier struggled again and continues to be a nice buy low target. He's not going to be as valuable this year as he was last year due to Bridges making the leap, but he's still going to be a mid-round player once his shot starts to fall. Could be a little bit until that happens. However, a double ankle sprain, that's a tough injury to come back from. If you are punting field goal percentage, a buy low offer is an absolute must. He has clear top 50 upside in that setup. Morant had another big game for the Grizz and is now posting top 25 numbers in 9-cat. He's been one of the biggest pleasant surprises this year. However, he's a bit of a sell high in all leagues. He's clearly improved, but it would be very surprising if he continued to average 1.7 steals per game. He managed only 0.9 steals per game in each of his first 2 years in the association, so we're likely going to see some regression there. Once his steals do drop, he's going to fall back into the middle rounds in 9-cat. In 8-cat, I'm probably not selling. His floor is pretty high in that setup. I'd probably be holding tight unless I could get a safe top 20 guy for him. Dylan Brooks coming back was the biggest fantasy storyline from this game, not because Brooks himself is all that interesting. He's just a back-end punt field goal percentage option who will likely be more of a 14-team guy outside of punt field goal percentage. It was interesting because of Brooks' impact on the rest of the rotation. Melton played 32, Kyle Anderson played 25, Brooks played 26, and Bane was the biggest loser, was only 21 minutes of playing time. Right now, I'd hold everybody. One game doesn't tell us all that much. We can't say for sure that Melton is super safe, just like we can't write off Bane just yet. Bane's low minutes were likely tied to his 1 for 10 shooting as well. We got to see how he does on nights where he's shooting decently. Kyle Anderson, I'm holding as well. The original plan was to start him beside Brooks. It's possible that the Grizzlies go back to that setup at some point, especially if they start struggling at some point. Anderson is producing some pretty nice per minute numbers once again, so if his minutes do jump, become pretty valuable in a hurry. Steven Adams has been trending down hard, but he did have a nice game last night. He had 9 and 13 with 2 blocks. Unfortunately, he went 1 for 5 from the line. He's been doing real nice from the line, but he's due for some regression. I'm holding for now in punt free throw percentage, but in other builds, I'd say he's expendable. The Thunder versus Pelicans is next. You probably didn't watch this unless you live in Oklahoma City or New Orleans. Even then, my question is why? The Thunder are all of a sudden 4-6. It doesn't feel that way, but here we are. SGA had a big game and so did Lou Dort. Dort had 27 on 13 shots and went 9 for 10 from the line. Don't be fooled by the big game. He's just a streamer in standard and a forgettable punt field goal percentage option in deeper settings. He's still a very weak per minute guy, so the big minutes don't mean all that much. He's been a top 160 player so far, but that's because he's shooting 89.5% on 4.2 free throws a night. Once that connection rate comes down, which it will, he shot 74% from the line last year. He'll be more of a borderline top 200 player. Giddey had a messy 7, 12, and 9 line. We'll take the boards and the dimes, but the rest of the line was ugly. He had 5 turnovers as well, which is a little concerning. His turnover rate was surprisingly good to start the year. Had a lot of 2 turnover games, but it's been creeping up as the season has gone along. He's had at least 4 in each of his last 3 games. He's a very nice points league piece, but in standard leagues, he's just a low-end player for now who has to be paired with a friendly build like punt field goal percentage to be super useful. Despite his steal rate coming in higher than expected at 1.4 steals per game, Giddey has only been a top 159 category option up to this point. Basically had 14 and 7 on decent shooting with no defensive numbers. He looks a little improved this year. He can be useful in friendly builds in 14 and 16 team leagues. Still not a roto option though due to all the holes in his line. Na got loose on the Pelicans side, which is great to see. He had 33 with 4 threes, 10 boards, 4 dimes, 2 steals, and a block. Been getting some Na drop questions, which will probably dry up after last night. He wasn't a drop before last night's big game, though. The shooting has been ugly, but the rest of the line has been real solid. If he shoots even 39% this year, which he'll probably top actually, he'll be pretty valuable due to his all-around game. After his next stud, he'll be a nice buy low target in punt field goal percentage. JV and Graham did their usual. Valanciunas is a monster who I'm not selling high just yet. Zion doesn't sound like he's too close, so we should get a lot more monster lines from Val. And I'd want to get those monster lines before trying to flip him for a safer early round option. Hart only played 15 minutes because he got tossed. He's an ad in standard leagues, and it's possible that he remains that way once Ingram is back. The Pelicans just do not have a ton of true rotation level players on their squad, so it's very possible that Hart continues to play big minutes for the foreseeable future. I don't think it's a lock, but I could see 28 minutes going forward. He's an excellent option if you need a boards boost that comes with a 3 and close to a steal a night. Our next game is the Bucks versus the Knicks. Still no Middleton, but the Bucks were able to get the win. Giannis was actually pretty quiet, but the Bucks' depth came through. Portis had 17 with 3 threes, and Pat Connaughton went off for 23 with 7 threes, 9 boards, and 5 assists. It's a hell of a line. Portis is an ad everywhere with Brook Lopez's status still a question mark. His minutes will likely be in the low 20s once Lopez is back, which will make him just a back-end option in 12-teamers. But until then, he's going to feast and post mid-round numbers. Expect a bunch of double-doubles. Connaughton is still just a streamer for threes that comes with more boards than most three-point options. Going into last night, Connaughton had scored in double digits in only 1 of his last 7 games. He's too inconsistent to really trust as a long-term hold. George Hill had a nice line with 8 points, 2 threes, 5 boards, 5 assists, and 2 steals. Fine as a deep league option until Middleton is back, but he's just a streamer in 12 teamers, even when he's playing 30 minutes. Just not the same guy he was in his first go-around with the Bucks. Grayson Allen had 15 with 5 threes and 5 boards. He's a sell high. I could see him being a back-end standard league guy all year, but he's not going to continue to be a top 50 player. Middleton's return will hurt him, and eventually he'll have to deal with Dante DiVincenzo. Try to get it to safe top 100 player for him, and if that doesn't work, use him as a sweetener in a bigger deal. The Knicks starters were beyond horrendous last night. Randall had 16 on 15 shots with nothing else, and he was somehow easily the best of the starters. Mitchell Robinson had a very mediocre night despite Noel being out. He's a must-hold in category leagues, but in points leagues where the format is not as friendly to him, he's expendable. I don't see him turning it around in a big way. His block rate has just not been the same since he started playing more and had to start worrying about staying out of foul trouble. RJ Barrett had 9 points and nothing else. He's kind of the opposite of Mitch. Nice in points leagues and just back end in category leagues. Back end is almost too generous. Barrett has only been a top 175 player in 9 cat up to this point. I think he'll be better than that going forward as his steal rate and field goal percentage have been lower than expected, but he doesn't have top 100 upside due to the holes in his line. Kemba returned to the lineup and played 18 minutes and posted a massive dud. I know it's tough. I'm still holding though. It's tough because he still has mid-round upside in punt field goal percentage, and you're usually not going to find that on the wire. I'd rather gamble on him turning it around than swap him for someone whose upside likely isn't inside of the top 100. Everyone on the bench played extra and played pretty well. Rose burst quickly and top in all out big games. Rose is the only somewhat useful fantasy asset of the group. He'll be up and down since his value is closely tied to Kemba, but right now he's a clear standard league player. He's been a top 85 per game player up to this point and a top 40 per minute producer. The Nets made quick work of the Magic, which is not a surprise. Harden had a triple-double, and Durant had 30 on 11 for 12 shooting. Durant didn't do anything else, but it's hard to complain when he's that efficient. I'm not super worried about Harden, despite the somewhat slow start. I think he's still playing himself into shape and getting used to the new rules. We've pretty much seen his floor up to this point, which is kind of crazy, as he's still producing top 7 numbers in 8 cat. Joe Harris didn't do much. He hasn't been doing much at all this year. He could eventually be a standard league option, but until he starts shooting better from the field, he's just a streamer. Harris can be useful because he's usually solid at field goal percentage impact plus threes, which is not a combo that you usually find on the wire. But right now he's just threes without the field goal percentage impact, so nothing's really separating him from the millions of threes options that are available on every wire. Bruce Brown is a nice deep league option. He's just a streamer in 12, though. He had 3 steals and a block last night. LMA had another nice game with 21 and 8. Fine as a back-end play, but I don't think he's going to be a must-hold all year long. The minutes just won't be consistent when Claxton is back, and he's not going to continue to shoot over 60% from the field. I bet he settles in as more of a top 130-ish guy. Franz Wagner has been a little quiet lately, but he went off last night for 6 steals. He added 10 points and 7 boards and is a must-hold in all leagues. I'm sure there will be growing pains as there is with all rookies, but his role looks pretty safe right now. Looks like Chuma is going to be the odd guy out. Cole Anthony had 8 boards and 3 steals, but the rest of his line was gross. He looks much improved, but he's an obvious sell high. I'd aim for the middle rounds, although that might be a stretch if your league is sharp. His steal rate likely won't hold, and his three-point shooting will come down as well. Plus, we eventually have to worry about Markelle Fultz. Mo Bamba had a big game. He's locked into a stud. I love Mo. Probably a little bit of a sell high due to the possibility that Jonathan Isaac comes back in and costs him some minutes. But given how Mo's played, I don't think that's a lock. It could easily be Wendell Carter getting the short end of the stick. I just write it out at this point unless you can get an early rounder for him, which you probably can't. Jalen Suggs had another very rough night. He had 7, 5, and 4 with nothing else on 2 for 8 shooting. I don't have as much patience with Suggs as I do with other rookies because, one, he's looked really, really bad. There's no way around it. He's been one of the least productive players in the league on a per-minute basis. Been barely a top 300 player up to this point, despite playing about 28 minutes a night. He could improve a significant amount and still just end up as a top 200 player. The second reason is Markelle Fultz. Is the leash going to be as long when Fultz is healthy? Maybe, maybe not. I'm fine with dropping him. The Suns and Blazers game played out how you would have expected it to. The Blazers just had no answer for Frank Kaminsky. Big Frank dropped 31 on 12 for 18 shooting with 7 boards and a block, adding a couple threes and 5 for 5 shooting from the line, and you have yourself a first-round line. Kaminsky is a very nice streamer until Aiden is back, but once Aiden is healthy, he'll be a drop everywhere, as he might not even be in the rotation. JaVale McGee started for Aiden and had himself a solid night as well. He had 14 and 8 in only 16 minutes. McGee has a little more lasting power than Kaminsky. He only sees minutes in the mid-teens when Aiden is active, but that's enough run to make him useful in 16-team league setups and friendly builds since he's such a monster per minute guy. In standard leagues, he should be one of your go-to big man number streamers. Mikal Bridges had another 0 steal night. He's a mid-round player, but it looks like last year's steals drop may be the new normal, unfortunately. You can be a top 35 player if that elite steal rate ever comes back, but as long as he's a forgettable contributor in the category, he'll be more of a top 60 option. He's not going to continue to average 0.7 steals per game like he has, but at this point I would just assume that he tops up around average, which is about 1.1 a night. Jay Crowder had a nice game with 12 points, 2 threes, 5 boards, and 3 steals. I'm sure he'll have extended standard league stretches this year, but he's too streaky to be a must-hold, especially outside of punt field goal percentage where he gains a fair amount of value. Dame had 28, 7, and 7 with only 1 3 and no steals. He's looked slightly better lately, but still not even close to his usual self. He's trying to play through his ab injury, which is both good and bad. Good in that he's not missing games, but bad in that it may drag the injury out. He's a buy low, but you want to be careful with him. The floor here is pretty low. It's possible that the injury becomes too much for him to gut out. It's also possible that it hampers him all season long. The new rules also add to the risk surrounding Lillard. He's currently averaging only 3.3 free throw attempts, which is well below last year's 7.2 free throw attempts. I consider moving a top 25 player for him, but I'm not sure I'd go any higher than that at the moment. Norm and CJ, on the other hand, were both solid as they've been all year. Both players look good this year and are locked in as mid-round options. Norm has looked like the guy he was in Toronto. His 3-point percentage has bounced back as predicted. Nurk got into foul trouble, played only 19, and laid a huge egg. I know some are frustrated about his minutes, and my response to that is to get used to it. Nurk is just a big boy who can't handle the big minutes. He's never played big minutes outside of the bubble, where every game was Game 7 for the Blazers. He also gasped badly by the end of the Blazers bubble run and got embarrassed against the Lakers because he couldn't handle the big minutes. He's going to be in the 25 to 27 minute per game range, and that's fine. Still be a mid-round guy with that much run and all the potential to be better than that in punt free throw percentage. His value is being dragged down once again by his free throw shooting. I have no idea why his free throw shooting didn't generate more discussion in the offseason. It seemed like people were just overlooking it. He's shot well from the line only once during his entire career, and he's been pretty poor every other year. That nice high 70s year looks like a fluke. Larry Nance got extra run because of the Nurk foul trouble, and he put up 13, 5, and 3 in 27 minutes. I'm watching to see if the nice game gets some extra minutes, but I'm not adding at the moment. This was the first time this year that Nance topped 22 minutes in a game. The Spurs versus the Kings is our last game of the day. The Spurs absolutely trucked the Kings behind 26, 6, and 7 from DeJounte Murray. Murray is playing well above expectations, but I wouldn't really call him a sell high outside of his steals, which likely will come down since very few players average 2.2 steals per game. There's nothing in his line that looks super unsustainable. The bump in his value has been driven by a minutes increase and an increase in playmaking duties made available by DeMar DeRozan's departure. If you can get a locked-in top 20 option for him, then sure, go ahead and sell. But otherwise, I would just hold tight. The only downside to having Murray is that the Spurs have a 2-game playoff week in some setups. Keldon Johnson only had 8 points, but he did have a 3, 12 boards, 4 dimes, 3 steals, and 1 block. He also went 1 for 4 from the line, but overall, a good night from Johnson. I view Keldon as just a back-end 12-teamer. I don't think he's a must-grab by any stretch. He's only producing top 165 numbers in 9-cat this year due to his lack of 3-ball and his really rough year at the line. That's despite more than doubling last year's steal rate. He's sitting at 1.4 steals per game this year, which is over double last year's 0.6 steals per game. It's fair to expect a lot of regression there. And once the regression hits, things get real ugly. We got to remember he started last year hot in the steals column before falling off a cliff as well. It's not a lock that his steals hold even at an average rate. I'm skeptical of his steal rate not only because it was terrible last year, but because it was terrible in college. Steal rate in college tends to translate to the pros. Guys who don't get steals in college tend not to get steals in the pros either. Derek White had a very quiet night with only 2 points on 1 for 6 shooting, but the rest of his line was pretty nice. He had 6 dimes, 2 steals, and 1 block. White is a bit of a buy low. He's been a top 90 player this year despite shooting 37.8% from the floor and 76.0% from the line. Both numbers are well below his usual once we start to see some positive regression in those two areas, and he should be a mid-round player. He's a really nice buy low target for teams punting field goal percentage because 1, he'll gain value, and 2, he brings some real nice out of position swats, and swats are almost always a problem for punt field goal percentage. The Kings were not interested in defense last night, which allowed McDermott, Eubanks, Vassell, Thad, Lonnie Walker, and Brent Forbes to go off. All 6 players scored at least 15 points last night. McDermott is just a points and 3 streamer. He's actually not that good of a 3 streamer. He's always been a surprisingly good but not great producer in the category. Eubanks is fine for big man numbers, but likely just for another game or 2. I don't think Pirtle's that far away. That is great, obviously, but is he going to be a big part of the rotation when Pirtle is back? Hard to say. I would grab him just in case, however, since his upside is significant. You never know. Walker and Forbes are just streamers as well. Forbes is not even a lock to be in the rotation some nights. Vassell is the most interesting of the group since his path to the minutes is relatively clear. He had 15 with 5 threes, 5 boards, and a steal last night, and is now ranked just inside of the top 100 in 9 category leagues. He may be stuck in that 26 minute per game range for a while, but given that he's not hurting you, it's pretty easy stash up to this point, and given that his upside is pretty significant down the stretch, feels like clear pickup and hold to me. Our last team of the day is the Kings, although given last night's game, we should probably go back to calling them the Kangs. Not only did they get destroyed by a team unlikely to make the playoffs, Marvin Bagley also refused to enter the game when asked. That sounds like a situation that's going to be fun to follow. At least De'Aaron Fox was good. He finally woke up. He had 37 points on great shooting with 6 assists, 1 steal, and 3 blocks. Definitely not out of the woods yet, but it's a great sign. He had been trending up slightly before last night's explosion, so I'm pretty hopeful. The big game probably closes that buy low window for now. In punt free throw percentage, he's still a good bet to finish inside of the top 50, possibly well inside of the top 50, but in other builds, he's likely just going to be more of a top 70 guy in 9-cat. All the other King starters were bad. Holmes and Barnes have cooled down a bit, but I'm not too worried about either player. Holmes is still a lock to be an early round option in friendly builds. The second round is in play in punt threes, punt assists, and punt steals. Barnes is less of a sure thing, but his role remains massive. He's not going to continue to be a top 20 player, but the top 50 is doable as long as he continues to play almost 37 minutes a night. He's a sell high, but I doubt you can get fair value for him. You're not going to get a top 40 player for someone with his history. Davion Mitchell is the last guy we'll chat about today. He had 13 and 6 on 16 shots with no steals. Mitchell is nowhere near a standard league player. I know he's on a lot of rosters, but he shouldn't be. Even in 14-team leagues, I wouldn't really want him. I just view him as a so-so streamer at this point. If he was picking up steals like he was in college, he averaged 1.9 steals per game in his last year at Baylor, he'd be useful. But as long as he's continuing to average just over half a steal a game, he's going to struggle to be more than a top 200 player. In 16-team leagues, he's fine as a hold. And that's all we've got for today. Thanks for tuning in to Elite Fantasy Basketball's first podcast of the year. Tell your friends, or maybe just those not in your league, about the pod. I appreciate it. I'll be back next week with another pod. If you like what you heard, please subscribe wherever you listen to the podcast and consider signing up for the site. You get a written version of what we just went through on the pod every day, as well as a projection set that is updated daily. If you'd like to follow me on Twitter, my Twitter is AdamGStock. I'll get a lot of questions, but I try to get back to as many as I can. Thanks for listening, guys.